Welcome to part 4 of our exploration into philosophy, the philosophy of knowing and being. And with this fourth session, we're moving into being. That is metaphysics, or at least metaphysics is one name for what we're talking about. So let's dive in with just some general introductory explanations of this whole idea of the study of being. Well, what are we talking about? We could look at this philosophy of being as the most general science of all. It's the broadest possible exploration into the universe around us. Kind of kicks off with Aristotle, who lived about 300 years before Christ. And Aristotle distinguished between a science that studied being just as being. Just being itself. And he distinguished that as opposed to particular sciences, which kind of sliced off or cut off a part of being and investigated just that attribute of that part of being. So for instance, particular sciences, such as mathematics, well, mathematics examines being, but being as quantified or countable. Or biology is the science which examines being, but being as living. Or physics examines being as material, or as being is in motion. But what about the most general of all sciences that simply examines being, simply as being? You can see where that would be the broadest of all possible categories, because outside of being there is literally nothing. There's different names for this science of being. Aristotle called it first philosophy. That's Aristotle's term for this science of being, because he thought that it was the foundational study for all the other more particular, less universal sciences. So before you can study being as living, well, you have to study being. Before you can study being as quantified, you have to study being. So he called this first philosophy. You actually won't hear that term as much. What you hear more often is metaphysics. Now, metaphysics has become the common term for this most general of all fields of study, actually by an odd quirk of history in the history of editing. So the story is that there existed a collection of Aristotle's writings on this topic of being in general. They appear to be these writings that became known as the metaphysics. They seem to be more like drafts of an incomplete work, or sketches on the topic he called first philosophy. So there are these sketches, these notes on first philosophy. These writings were collected, and they're located in what came to be the standard collection of his works. They were placed after his work, The Physics. So he wrote another book called The Physics, and in the edited version, these notes on first philosophy were placed after The Physics. And so this body of writings and notes came to be referred as those after the physics. And in Greek, that's meta ta physika. And that expression morphed into the common label for the study of being, metaphysics, after the physics. So it actually has nothing to do with physics. It's just that's where they were placed in the common collection. As a note, this is different than if you go into some bookstores and you look under the metaphysics section. It's like the occult section. Completely different use of the word. So don't be surprised if you walk into Barnes & Noble and look for the metaphysics section and it's all kinds of weird stuff about the occult. Completely different use of the term. That's, beyond the physical. Not what we're talking about here. So most often you'll hear this called metaphysics. You'll also often hear the word ontology, and you might hear ontology in some of your theology classes. I know I use the term ontology probably more than metaphysics. Ontology is from another Greek verb. It's from the present participle of the verb to be, ontos in Greek, right? Another term for the general study of being. So if I'm in class, in fact, I was in class today talking about the ontology of the liturgy. I'm simply talking about the very nature or being of the liturgy. So what is a thing's ontology? What is its being? Well, we can right away turn to some questions about being. We'll start diving into some particular philosophical questions about being. And the first question is, how can we actually talk about being in general, right? There's a problem in speaking coherently or cogently about being, right? Because it's the problem of explaining the most general of all categories. See, because when we try to explain anything, right, we start by somehow identifying it, picking it out to be the thing that's to be explained. So we point to that bug flying around the banana. But then when we go on to explain it, we use new and different terms than the ones we just used to pick out the object. So if I want to explain to you that bug flying around the banana, it doesn't help if I just repeat bug, flying, or banana, right? I might have to define its color. Well, it's brownish black. Or its size. It's the size of a marble, or et cetera, right? It's got a wingspan of so-and-so, or it's got purple veins. Any of those things, right? If I want to talk about the bug flying around the banana, I give you no more information if I use the words bug, flying, or banana, right? But what if what we're trying to identify or pick out to be explained or described is simply being? Then how can our explanation be something in new and different terms? Because for any explanation or description we give, we're going to have to use terms that are just synonyms for being in general. Or worse, terms that identify less universal and more specific subdivisions of being, right? So if I want to describe being, I can't do it in terms of being because that doesn't give us any new information. And if I go to just some slice of being, I'm not describing it better. I'm moving away from general being. So there's the problem of just speaking about being in general. We're going to leave it at that. We can't solve that problem right now. This comes up sometimes, I suppose, though, when we talk about is being a quality of a thing, right? A thing might be white, or it might be fuzzy, or it might be hard. Is being one of those categories? Is it we would say, is it a predicate like those other things? I can predicate white of something, or green, or heavy. Right? Can I predicate being of something? Because no matter what I pick out, it's going to have being, because the only other option is nothing. So you can see there's problems with lumping being in with just other kinds of qualities in describing being. There's also the question of shifting meaning of these metaphysical terms. And we've looked at this idea, but it's worth revisiting. That when terms are applied, they're obviously applied to many different particular instances. So the green coffee cup, the green frog, the green, the green book, right? One term applied to many particular instances. But the meaning of a term might or might not differ in those different applications. So hopefully this sounds a little bit familiar. In the later case, when they don't differ, the term is used univocally. In the former case, if it does differ, the term is either equivocal or analogous. So philosophers have raised the question of whether the meanings of metaphysical terms, like being, the most general concepts in our language, differ in their different applications. And so hopefully you've picked up that we've talked about this already, that there are three ways of using different terms in application in different cases. One would be the univocal use of a term. And if you pick that word apart, uni, one, vocal, voice. We speak of, we use a term of two different things with one voice, right? In this case, the meaning of the term is exactly the same in the different applications considered. So for example, table applied to the object in our kitchen and the object in our dining room has the exact same meaning. Or bank applied to the ground level descending to the Milwaukee River, and to the ground sloping down to the Root River has the same meaning, right? Same meaning of the same term. You can also have equivocal. Remember, we've talked about equivocation. The meaning of the term is different and unrelated in the applications considered. So, for example, pen applied to livestock, a livestock enclosure, and a writing instrument is used equivocally, a pig pen or a ballpoint pen. Or bank applied to the land sloping down to the Root River, and the local branch of the BMO Harris is also used equivocally. So the same word, same term, different meanings. And then there's the analogical. The meaning of the term is somewhat different and somewhat the same in different applications. So for example, branch applied to the part of the tree and to the local BMO Harris bank, that's used analogously, right? The bank branch has some resemblance to a tree branch. That's why we use the word. Good applied to a person and to a baseball game is likewise used analogically. Oops. Well, what about the analogical understanding of metaphysical terms? Well, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, and by the way, if you can make this out on the video, the background there to these slides, that's St. Thomas Aquinas, 13th century theologian. According to St. Thomas Aquinas and others, the terms used to express very general concepts of metaphysics are used analogically in that third sense. For example, being itself has somewhat the same but also significantly different senses applied to a coat rack, a cherry pie, a person, the number 7, nearsightedness, a car, laughter, depression, a tree, the law of gravity, the color brown, angelic spirits, and God, right? Those all exist. They have being. They be, right? But they don't be in the same way, right? They don't have existence in the same way. So it seems that being, when applied to different things, is analogical. This analogical character of being is seen by those philosophers who espouse it as a helpful way of understanding how we can speak meaningfully about the whole of being. So, for example, theists, people who believe in God, will say that it allows us to speak meaningfully about God while admitting that the words we use to speak of God cannot mean exactly what they mean when we apply those terms to things in the world, right? So I say God is good, but he's not good like I'm good, or like you're good, or like a pizza is good. God is Father, but not like I'm a father. God exists, but not like I exist. Physicists actually are encountering similar problems in attempting to talk about the realm of the subatomic. They're finding that ordinary categories of substance or things, properties, events, owing to the need of descriptions which span these tiny categories, simply cannot mean the same thing applied to that level as they do at the level of ordinary sized objects. So even in the physical world, we're finding that analogy and analogical ways of thinking are very important to understanding the universe around us. So when we come back, we'll continue asking some questions about metaphysics, about being. We'll start with cause.